listening to Tolushe Francis, who will be speaking to us about youth and trauma, shaping the future of Africa trauma care. Tolushe Francis, a biochemistry graduate from Bowen University with an executive MBA from Quantic School of Business and Technology, USA, boasts experience. He began his career at Jumia Nigeria as a hub manager and later contributed significantly to GIG Logistics e-commerce product growth. Passionate about mental health, he served as the COO at Mentally Aware Nigeria Initiative and holds roles in various mental health organizations worldwide. Tolushe is a renowned speaker, therapist, and author with an international recognition from organizations like the BBC, WHO, Lancet Financial Times, and the Global Health Features Commission. He's a dedicated member of Rotary International and a PhD candidate at Charisma University. His extensive achievements include recognition by the Lagos State Government, MIPAD's 100 under 40, and numerous awards in health and blogging. Tolushe's commitment to mental health advocacy shines through his podcast, YouTube channel, blog, and published books. Welcome with me, Tolushe Francis.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're joining from. It's a great privilege to be here. I don't think this lighting is doing justice, so I think I'll just change my location. The light is too much on me. Give me a second, please.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, this is better. This is better.
Okay. Yes.
All right. So, thank you for having me. It's a great privilege to be invited to speak here at the Africa Trauma Care Conference. Congratulations once again to Dr. Professor Merino. Doing this consistently is not an easy feat. She's always the ginger for my annual Mental Health at Work conference that I hold every May, because I ask myself, if Prof can do ATC every year, then what's my excuse? But it's good to be back here again, and quite an interesting theme this particular year, bridging gaps, and I'll be talking about youth and trauma care. I have no slides today, it's deliberate. I spoke with Abimbola that when I do slides, I'm kind of like conscripted, but I do have a write-up which I've shared with her that may be shared with everyone later on. But I'm going to use what I've written down deliberately because I don't want to leave anything behind, and I want to be able to, cover that which I really want to talk about today. So come along with me as we look through this together. So I'll begin with an introduction where I said defining the impact of trauma on Africa's youth. Defining the impact of trauma on Africa's youth. And I said, I begin by defining the impact on Africa because I want to emphasize the physical and psychological trauma. I like the challenges Africa youth face, amongst other things. Then look at the ripple effect, of all of this. So it's important that we look at all of these one after the other. So I'll begin by asking ourselves, we've been talking about trauma before now, and it's important that we ask ourselves what exactly is trauma. So maybe because I love to teach, I love to explain things to people, so I usually like to have some of those questions, highlighted, in terms of how I speak, So let's look at what are the significant challenges that African youth face. I live in a country called Nigeria that exists in a continent called Africa and a subcontinent called West Africa. And a whole lot of things happen that creates trauma for youth. We had the one of Kenya where the youth took to the streets, making demands and all of those things. We had one in Nigeria in which we celebrated, or we marked, not celebrated, we marked the 4th anniversary of the EndSARS Lekki Tollgate issues. Now you have the trauma that exists from conflict within communities, that exists from the economic crisis that exists in our environment, in our country as a whole. So you would understand that there are always things that are happening that creates traumatic experiences for people. You have children who do not even know anything about their father, and then one day one man shows up and says, "I'm your father." You have disjoint homes or broken homes, as the case may be. You have people who are struggling with understanding the challenges that they face in academic setting, where probably a lecturer is asking for sex for grades. You have a lot of these experiences from people and youth specifically. And so it's important to understand that these circumstances are multifaceted. They are coming from different angles, not just one angle, and youth have to face it every day. It would interest you to know that at the World Federation for Mental Health, where I currently serve as the Africa Regional Vice President, we have created a new section called the Youth Section. And that's because we want that to be able to address matters of the youth and subsequently be rolling out products. Now, it's also important to know that we've also had reasons to, to have the women's section of the World Federation for Mental Health, which is focused on the crisis, the mental health crisis of women. Now, it will interest you to know that some challenges are peculiar to genders, while some aren't, some are natural. Every youth faces the same thing as a youth, but the context may be different in terms of gender, in terms of sex, and all of that. So let's look at what we have in terms of Africa. As I'll talk about rates of violence, abuse, and sexual exploitation. Abuse is so predominant in our community today. I'm focusing on Africa because this is an Africa Trauma Care Conference, right? So let's beam the searchlight on Africa. Forget what's happening in Europe. Forget what's happening in Latin. Forget what's happening in Asian continent. Let's beam the light on Europe. We have a lot of crisis going on in Africa. And beam the light on Africa, I mean to say. A lot of crisis happening in Africa. You have people who are traumatized for one reason to the other, right? You have people who are going through a whole lot of experiences, child molestation, child deprivation, So it's important to look at country by country or sub-African region to say, look, what exactly is it that Africa is experiencing? What are some of these trauma or events, so to speak, that creates trauma in youth? Because at the end of the day, you must understand that the youth is a youth, right? And it's important to understand that being a youth deals with age. Okay, being a youth deals with age, right? And being a youth means that you are at that moment of your life, that period of your life, where you're supposed to be active. You're supposed to be bring the vibe, you're supposed to bring vibe to wherever you find yourself because you have strength. You have strength within you to be able to pull through, right? You have strength within you to be able to pull through. Sometimes the data might say adolescent mental health as against youth, in terms of trauma, because in the specialty of mental health, there's really nothing like youth mental health. What you have is child and adolescent mental health, right? So it's important to understand that you may have that dichotomy in terms of usage, as a whole, right? But it doesn't take away the fact that it exists. It doesn't take away the fact that youth, day after day, day in, day out, are experiencing this. And there are lots of articles out there that point us to the fact that people still talk about the Rwanda genocide, right? You have the Democratic Republic of Congo. You have children soldiers in some of these countries who are thrown out there at the age of 15, to go out there and begin to carry guns as a way of defending their country. Now, imagine how these ones grow up and get perception about that. Now, some stats that I would like to share with us from the World Health Organization as at 10th of October says that globally, 1 in 7 10 to 19-year-olds experience a mental disorder, accounting for 15% of global burden of disease, right? It goes further to say that depression, anxiety, and behavioral disorders are among the leading causes of illness and disability. I know that we are looking at trauma, but let's not forget that trauma is not always something that happens physical. Now, in medicine, for those who are doctors, watching or who would watch this later, trauma in orthopedics is different from trauma in mental health care. Let's get that clearly, right? Trauma in mental health care is a different ballgame entirely because it's not something that is seen on you physically, right? Is a consequence of something that's happened to you. It's a consequence of things that you have experienced. That's trauma as far as mental health care is concerned. It's meant from trauma medicine where you're dealing with an impact on a person, or maybe in orthopedics where you're dealing with an impact on a person. So the great question of what are those things that could happen to a person that could create trauma in them? That's how we look at it in the mental health field, right? What are the things that could happen that as a result of that trauma, right, as a result of those things, right, that person experiences trauma. And so you have grief, for example, right? You have grief, you have accidents that are happening, you have molestation, you have child slavery, and a host of other things. You have verbal abuse that could create trauma in a person, and how a child grows. You know, the memories are carried on as the child grows. The memories rest with that child, right? That it takes care, which in this case is probably therapy for that person to outgrow that particular experience, right? And understand that, okay, I have to deal with this, or I have dealt with it. And so when I read those stats and they mention depression, I want us to understand where they are coming from. That it doesn't take away the fact that it's trauma, but these things have happened that have led to this, right? And one of the things that studies have also shown us that some youth are at greater risk of mental health conditions due to living conditions. So you have stigma, for example, which could traumatize a person. You have discrimination or exclusion. You have lack of access to quality support and services. People are living in fragile environments. They wake up every morning and they're not even sure what the next thing would be. You know, they wake up and they're clenching their fists because they're not sure of what could happen. They are defenseless, right? I read an article recently that talked about trauma exposure and post-traumatic stress symptoms in urban African schools. And this survey was done in Cape Town, South Africa, and Nairobi in Kenya. Now, come along with me. Let me give you what the result of that study was. So first of all, and I want to use this to discuss what I want to discuss today, and I promise you that I'll be out of your faces in no long time. Now, they assess trauma exposure, PTSD, and gender differences in adolescents in Cape Town, in South Africa, which is in Southern Africa, and Nairobi, Kenya, which is in Eastern Africa. Now, they sampled 2,041 boys and girls from 18 schools. Anonymous, right? Self-report questionnaires. Now, what was the result? More than 80% reported exposure to severe trauma, either as victims or as witnesses. And I would like to dwell on these witnesses a bit because sometimes we think that it's the person who took part in the actions that gets traumatized the most. I fear to break this to you that witnessing an event is enough to create trauma or chaos. Yesterday, I was on TikTok. Was yesterday before yesterday? I was on TikTok, and the conversation was going on around why homes get broken, or whether a woman should remain in the house, in the home, in the marriage, and put it that way, whether a woman should remain in a marriage, even if domestic violence is happening there. And I was hearing a number of comments. And for me, it was conversations like that are usually a trigger for me because it hurts me when I read stories of people who died because they were trying to remain in a marriage. I'm not here to tell you to say, leave your marriage, right? But the burden of care says that you should, excuse yourself from a toxic environment, and you can always address it from that end rather than being in that toxic environment and trying to address the toxicity of the other person that you have no control over, right? And one of the things that I said to them is, so you hear women who say that they are staying there because of the children. And the real question is, you staying there because of the children, and the children are watching all that is happening, is traumatic for them. You may not know until they go older a bit, and then they begin to relive the experiences that they've had. And some of them make some decisions that has come to be part and parcel of them as adults. Or even some of them go ahead to behave in the way their father or their mother was behaving back then because they think that that's the best way to behave, right? So we must create this balance to understand that it's not only those who are partakers of these wrongdoings or these social vices that get traumatized, but even those who witness it, right? A child who witnesses a man shoot another person is traumatized by that, and he grows up with that trauma. He didn't shoot the gun. He wasn't the one who was shot, but he witnessed it being shot. And you are telling him that what will he now do if he was the one who had to do the shoot, or if he was the one who did the shooting? Trust me, the traumatic experiences are not measured that way. The most important thing is there is a view of it, or there is a witness of it. Now, so they said 80% reported exposure to severe trauma, either as victims or witnesses. Now, in Kenya, compared with South Africa, Kenya had significantly higher rate of exposure to witnessing violence. So Kenya had 69%, South Africa had 58%. Physical assault by family member, 27% versus 14%. And sexual assault, 18% versus 14%. Now, when it came to the issue of PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, for those who had full symptoms, the margin was wide. Kenya had 22.2%, South Africa 5%. And for partial PTSD, 12% versus 8%. Now, boys were likely as girls to meet PTSD symptom criteria. That tells you that it really has nothing to do with gender. So like I said, you have a lot of these events that happen that could traumatize youth. You have rates of violence, abuse, and sexual exploitation. For those in Nigeria, sometimes was it last year or 2 years, all this sex for grades stuff going around. You have the impact of armed conflict and displacement on children and adolescents. Many years back, there was the Ifa Modakeke war that was happening. You know, a lot of people were displaced. That was in southwest Nigeria. At some point, you had the Cameroon Bakassi Peninsula crisis, which was between Cameroon and Nigeria. This time around, in the Calabar region, which shares border with Bakassi. In Cameroon, you have that experience. You have those pockets of violence that are happening, and this has a way of displacing children, separating them from that life that they are used to, that life that they're exposed to, and then they have to pick up their lives again, and they struggle, you know, with the experiences, the flashbacks. You have poverty in the land, you have economic instability, you have social exclusion, and this contributes to both physical and emotional trauma. Right now, for a country like Nigeria, you're experiencing, you don't even know what name to call it, right? If you go to the market and you buy this at 10 naira today, you're not sure how much you buy it in the next 5 hours. And this alone is traumatic because you're not sure what you're earning, what your purchasing power is anymore. So you wake up every morning and you ask yourself, okay, yesterday I was able to buy stuff for 1,000 naira. Today, I'm not sure what this 1,000 naira can buy for me. And so even though you have money, it's as though you don't have money. That's enough. A traumatic experience for anyone out there. So you see these pockets, you know, existing here, and then this trauma could start from physical and then it becomes emotional, you know, on that particular person. But what was really the ripple effect of this, which I'm going to use to just as a wrap up? What was the ripple effect of this? You have increased rate of mental disorders like PTSD, anxiety, and depression. If this trauma is not addressed, in this condition are not addressed, the change, or the child is not brought, the teenager, the adolescent is not brought properly to a place of care, you have this person begins to experience increased rate of mental disorders. Like I said earlier, PTSD, depression, anxiety, and they all exist there. The impact of this trauma. They have behavioral issues. Recently, I was sharing with some people that when you see someone who is into substance use or substance abuse, don't be quick to assume that the person chose to be rewarded. Nobody wakes up and decides that, you know what, I am going to believe in this particular way, or maybe in this particular way. But the experiences that this person has had, which in this case is trauma, the exposures, what they've been exposed to, could lead them on that journey of living that way, so like substance abuse, violence, or criminal activity. Another thing that we need to consider, right, that could serve as long-lasting consequences of unaddressed trauma is impaired cognitive development and educational outcomes. Yeah. So their cognition develops slowly, you know, and this begins to hinder their future opportunities. So imagine a child who is displaced and finds himself in an area where it's okay to not even know how to speak the language that is globally and universally used. or is not even able to go to kind of school that helps the development of the person's cognition. As that person grows up to become a young adult, you begin to see the effect. How does this person think? How does this person behave? And you're wondering, where did you grow up? These are one of the ripple effects of how trauma can impact future health and development. And as a whole, so that we don't think that it's that person's problem, it can create a weakened workforce, right? So imagine if you have a population where the workforce, which is usually youth, the workforce is traumatized, you're going to have a big issue with your workforce. You're going to have a big issue with those that you employ. How then do we deal with this? We must begin to deal with the barriers to trauma care in Nigeria by addressing certain things. One is stigma. Stigma. We must deal with stigma. We must not allow people to be trauma stigmatized. That they experienced it is not their fault, but we all have a responsibility to make them know that it's okay to have experienced it, but it's not the end of the world and it doesn't define you. We must deal with limited access to care, infrastructure, trained professionals, resources. Let us have more resources that provide trauma-informed care, especially in rural areas. Are we able to speak in a language that they understand? If we send you to Ife in Southwest Nigeria or Osun State, are you able to speak in their language to get them to understand what is exactly happening or what you want to offer them? If we send you to Enugu in Enugu State, are you able to speak the language to them so they understand and bring it to their level? I always say that you take people from what they know to what they don't know. You don't take them from what they don't know to what they know. And sometimes coming down to their level could mean speaking in the language that they understand. So they are receptive and able to apply it to their lives. Okay, exactly, this is what I'm struggling with. You have cultural beliefs. Traditional practices may sometimes clash with modern approaches to mental health and trauma care. So we need not to create resistance. We need to look at what are the cultural beliefs of these people and infuse it. Sometimes people come for therapy and they ask me, am I a Christian? I tell them I'm a Christian, but I'm professionally trained not to use my religion as the basis of treatment. But is that what you want? So if that's what the person wants, I take them, I go through the route that they're conversant with. But the ultimate goal is to bring them that care that they need. So you could have scenarios like that. So you could use cultural beliefs to take that person from what they know to what they don't know in order to be able to give them that care. I know that not everybody here is a professional listening to me or watching me, but that means that we all have a responsibility to have knowledge, which is what this conference is all about, on trauma, right? And to what role do I have to play with respect to this? I may not be able to treat, but at least I can provide some form of first aid and I can refer to the right persons. And of course, lack of awareness, what I was trying to say, that it's important that people are aware. You have mental health first aid, you have psychological first aid, you have conferences like these where you get educated. Now, what is the role of education? If you want to build, we need to build a trauma-informed generation. And education is key to breaking the cycle. We must have a trauma-informed generation. Let us train teachers, educators to identify and address trauma in the classroom. A child is throwing tantrums. You don't see it as that child being stubborn, as that child being playful, but you're able to decide to say, why is this child behaving like this? And then you pay attention to those patterns, right? Let us create safe spaces within schools where students can talk and process traumatic experiences. There's a gossip bench in Kenya, for example, where you just go and sit down. There are elderly persons there waiting to talk to you. Right there in Kenya, right? You have some NGOs who are just there, you want to rant, just call, right? Can we have those kind of spaces in schools, tertiary institutions, for example? I remember back then, when I was in uni, we had these chairs, outside there. And sometimes I just go there to sit, I just go there to sit. And then whoever comes, I engage them in conversations. And trust me, it's always been rewarding. Can we have that in schools? Can we have that in our parks, right? People can go just sit down and someone walks up there and someone's able to have conversations with them using what they are familiar with, what they are passionate about to lead them on that journey of healing. Can we develop curricula that would incorporate mental health awareness, not mental health care, but the awareness and teach coping skills? And of course, let us encourage collaboration between schools, healthcare providers, and families so that we take the care to them, right? And so you begin to have community-based trauma care, peer support networks, telemedicine, and mobile health. and a public-private partnership. So in order to give a wholesome kind of care, we are building community-based trauma care. You're having a peer support network system. Telemedicine is there, and mobile health. You can be where you are and receive care. And then, of course, can there be partnership? NGOs partner with government partner with private organizations, and so on and so forth. Government can't do it alone. Private establishments can't do it alone as well. And I want to call on all youth just like me. Let's empower the future. Can youth serve as advocates for trauma care? Can we have campaigns that destigmatize trauma and mental health in our communities or mental illness in our communities? Can we have youth who participate in youth councils and advisory boards that help to shape national healthcare policies? As we set up these boards, advisory boards in NGOs, in organizations, government parastatals, can we infuse the youth into these boards to bring that bubbling energy that they have and that knowledge that they have? And let's build a society that is youth friendly and has a youth attack. And of course, let us train peer counselors and first responders within our schools and communities. We send these youth out. I know that there is an organization like MANI, Rotary Nigeria Initiatives, that has student advocacy network. Within schools, they are trained and they serve as first responders to their own peers who are in crisis. So what's my call to action to us all today? My call to action is to challenge everyone who is watching, who is listening, who will watch or listen, that you all have a responsibility, every one of us have a responsibility to build a trauma-informed society. As youth, we must rise up and change the status quo. We can't leave it to the professors and the doctors who have spent years and years of studying alone to do this work. There are courses that you can take that will educate and empower you to at least be a first responder. And trust me, it starts from there, and one after the other will change the face of trauma care in Africa, and especially amongst. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Tolushe. That was really, 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 really insightful. We have to take on the responsibility of taking care of people and making trauma care our responsibility. If you've been following in the chat, say yes, we can, and yes, we will, because we have to. We just have to. There's no other option at the moment. Thank you so much, Tolushe. Thank you very much. Okay, I invite Omolayo to take over.
Thank you